we want to share some of our experiences this evening with you about Sierra Leone. It's a country that I've been to twice. It's a country Kate's been to 3 times. And we just want to share some of the stories of the people, how the exciting news of how fast the truth is spreading there, and how we go about preaching in Sierra Leone. They are, I think, the world's most resilient people. They have been through trauma after trauma, which we shall come to in a minute. And there is a new generation of Bible believers there just who can't wait to understand the truth. And the picture here on the left is of some young brothers and sisters baptized when we were there in April 2014, who were absolutely delighted to meet us, who gave a fantastic statement of faith. And I hope that we'll introduce some of the wonderful people as we go through the course of this evening. Some facts and figures just to start off with, because I know you like to place where this country is. We are in the top right hand picture here. We are in West Africa. That's where Sierra Leone is. The capital is Freetown, and you can see it's got a population of just over 6 million people. Life expectancy isn't long, and not surprising when you see some of the conditions in which these people live. And it's a very mixed country, as a lot of West Africa is. Islam has a very strong hold. Christianity is about 1/4 of people, and then obviously you've still got some of the tribal customs, the belief in witch doctors, which some people still cling to. Thankfully, there has been no violence and no real tension as yet between Christian and Muslim in Sierra Leone. We of course are well aware of the tensions in Nigeria, or further inland in places of Mali, where ISIL have a very strong foundation. But it is very common to go into a village and for there to be both a mosque and a church, and for the elders of that village to want both a mosque and a church. They want the communities to live side by side in peace, and long may that continue. Sierra Leone, of course, used to be part of the British Empire. And I know you guys know all about the British Empire, having celebrated July the 4th just last weekend. And Freetown and Sierra Leone was no real exception. It was probably first established as a colony by the Portuguese back in the 15th century in about 1460. And only then did the British come along and kick out the Portuguese, as it was our wont to do. And it was the place where suddenly people began to see the light, where we released the slaves from our colony back in Freetown, hence the name. And there is still standing a great big cotton tree, which we shall show you, under which the slaves were released. They received their freedom and they could go off and again regain their lives for themselves. It was established as a colony, and it wasn't until 1961 that it was granted independence in a peaceful way, thankfully. And thereafter, the country really prospered. My uncle, who never came into the truth, he went out there as a water engineer in the early 60s with my aunt. They talk of the time when the railway ran perfectly to time. They were putting in water infrastructure, great big dams were being built, the postal system worked, the telecommunications system worked. They had great fun flying over there on these slow old jumbo jets with my cousin, who they put to sleep in the luggage rack on these old aeroplanes, only to wake up once and realise that she'd woken up and crawled all the way from the back of the plane to the front of the plane over the luggage rack. Such was the great way of travelling in those days. I'm sure the veterans will remember those days with much fondness, and maybe some of the baby boomers too. But in 1991, from Liberia came the warlord Charles Taylor, attracted by the diamonds in the country, and bring him with him all his monstrosities of war. He invaded a lot of the country. We'll talk about some of those atrocities quite shortly, but child soldiers were a very common thing to see as they captured them, as they brainwashed them, as they gave them a gun, as they taught them to shoot not just animals but people. And so terrible atrocities were seen in this country and witnessed by our brothers and sisters. They talk of walking past dead bodies in the street. They talk of the person next to them being shot as they ran from their village as the guerrillas came in. They talk of hiding for fear as the warlords came on the outskirts of Freetown, and it was then that the SAS were sent in from the British Army and managed to hold the bridge and protect the great big football stadium in which 40,000 people were cowering. They have really seen the dark side of life. And it really is a matter of blood diamonds, and the corporate world cannot hold its head up, as they were only too eager to get hold of these diamonds wherever they came from, and a lot of companies made themselves very rich from its trade. They never thought of the 100,000 refugees that were created, or the 15,000 amputees which had either an arm or a leg chopped off. And the whole education system was destroyed, and for a decade almost a whole generation did not go to school because there were no schools. They were too frightened to go to school. So dealing with illiteracy. But then how wonderful that the truth is so simple. And when I was having this conversation earlier on, when you link together all our first principle doctrines from beginning to end, and you see how they all knit together with no conflict, with no disagreement between them, how you can easily explain the nature of man and the forgiveness of sins and the nature of God and the humanity of the Lord Jesus Christ, and it falls into place. And I remember I was interviewing last April a young brother. He was a very intelligent school teacher, and I said to him, well, can you explain to me the nature of the relationship between the Lord God and his Son? And he looked at me and he said, it is very big. And I think actually you won't find a better definition of the relationship between the Lord God and the Lord Jesus Christ than that. It is very big, and we wonder at it, and we ponder over how the Lord Jesus learned and grew in wisdom and knowledge. And of course he went on to explain the true nature and the difference between the two, but I just thought that introduction was lovely. Last year, Ebola hit the region. This dreadful disease which is probably caught by eating bushmeat, by eating bats. And once you've taken of the meat or taken of some of the bodily juices of that, it is such a contagious disease which causes the organs of the body to shut down, a very high fever, profuse bleeding and bruising and temperature. And it is when you are in most need of help, when you're at your poorliest, that you're at the most contagious, shortly before you die and after you die. And for a culture which values the ability to say goodbye to your loved ones, for a culture who brings the whole family around a dead body, as they lay it in state in the family home, as they like to touch it for the last time before they carry it to burial, you can see how the contagion would spread so rapidly. And you can also wonder what fear these men and women who live in rural villages must have felt as men and women walked in overalls and head coverings and face masks and rubber gloves, as if they'd walked out of a science fiction movie. Not that they would know what a science fiction movie is. And so no wonder it took a long time to get a grip of this dreadful disease, as people fled, as they cowered, as they hid their sick members. They seemed to be get taken into the medical centre and still die. Well, if you're going to take them and they're still going to die, we'll try the witch doctor. And so it took a long time for the publicity messages to get through that it was far better for you to go to the centre, and increasingly the odds of survival improved. Needless to say, our Foreign Office doesn't recommend that we go to Sierra Leone at the moment. It's been over a year since we've been, and we're hoping that there will be no new cases of Ebola very shortly, so that that ban can be lifted and we can get back and see how our brothers and sisters are. The Lord has been very gracious. None of our members have been affected. Some of their wider family members, not in the truth, have been affected. But we are very grateful that our ecclesias have continued, albeit they haven't been able to greet one another with an holy kiss. They haven't even shaken hands or given what used to be the big bear hug welcome. It has changed the way that they interact in a way that we must find difficult to imagine. So when we travel to Sierra Leone, and here's Sister Natalie in the foreground, who's come on 3 trips with Kate, you really do take your life in your hands. For some reason, they put the airport on the other side of the estuary from the city, and there's no transport link other than this very old, rickety, overloaded ferry. You can choose the very fast speedboat, which fits about 20 people in, if you don't value your spine and you're quite okay for it to be compressed by going over all the waves, and it's also a very expensive trip. And when you get to Sierra Leone, this city situated again on 7 hills, it is so densely populated. Travelling around is really excited. Fred, you'll be really disappointed, the CBM insurance doesn't allow us to ride on the back of these motorbikes. Needless to say, when you do it, it's great fun, because it's one of the best ways to get around. Cars are very expensive, so getting around on the back of mopeds is fantastic. The dusty roads, there's a lot of money being invested in Africa. The Chinese economy, as you'll be well aware, seems to be buying up African states, buying up the mineral rights, buying favours with those governments. They are then sending over their own workforces. They put them in a Chinese compound. The Chinese are not let out. They're not really creating many jobs for the local Sierra Leoneans. They're exporting their own people. They do the job. They go back home. But at least some infrastructure is being put into the country. And we travel around in these little blue buses, and the recording brother of Freetown is a manager in the Freetown bus service. And it's great to have that contact, even though the buses, you take your life in your hand as you're being driven along the roads in them. So there's the cotton tree in the centre of Freetown, and it was back in 1983 that Brother Ron and Sister Betty Seeley from Birmingham stepped out of their boat and took a lecturing post over at the university in Freetown, and just stood underneath the cotton tree and handed out leaflets to whoever would take them, and started a Bible reading group. And within a year they had 3 baptisms, and then a little ecclesia, as you can see there, grew up in Freetown. And just as things were getting established, the civil war hit. The Seeleys had to leave, and our brothers and sisters were left to their own devices. We, of course, continued to support them during this period, although there was no banking system. You couldn't get money into the country. So what you had to do was to send money into Guinea, which is to the north of Sierra Leone. And the brothers and sisters would take the money and they would give it to a Brother David, who would make his way through the forests, through the bush, up over the border, collect the dollars, and go back down over the border, down and give that money to the brothers and sisters so that they could buy the food that they needed to live. I'm not saying that the CBM was involved in money laundering and money running, but we had to find some way of getting money to our brothers and sisters, and the Lord found a way. And in the last few years, since the war finished, in the early 2000s, the truth has now taken hold. We've grown from 4 ecclesias to 10 ecclesias, up to from about 20 or 30 members to 235 members. When we went last year, we had 50 baptisms. When we went the year before, we had 80 baptisms. The truth there is just growing at an astonishing rate. And that brings an awful lot of problems. When young elders are trying to teach, and we go in and make sure we do the interviews for baptism so that we know that there are no shortcuts being taken in the explanation of our doctrine. But then these young elders are left to run those ecclesias in our absence. And of course you can imagine what a tricky job that is. In the first century you had the wise men of Saul, of Peter, of Titus, of Timothy. They were blessed with the Spirit and the wisdom of God. And here we are, we've got a fast-growing community, and we really need to go out there and continue our support. Thankfully, we have email. Thankfully, we can make mobile phone calls to them. But you can imagine some of the teething problems that the truth experiences in Sierra Leone. When we went into the bush one day towards the border of Liberia, we had the most wonderful day, witnessing about 12 baptisms. We passed still burnt out buildings, bullet-ridden walls of public buildings from when the warlords used to drive into town and shoot anything that moved, and people are still living with that around them. When you go into a village, you have to go and introduce yourself to the chief of police just so that he knows what you are doing. And I asked him what it was like in those days, and all he would say was, it was very bad. They have difficulty in opening up and talking about those times. But thankfully, the Word of God is bringing this new birth through water, this new life, as people are finding hope in all that desperate darkness and unhappiness and suffering that they have been through. I'm going to hand over to Kate now, because she knows this stuff a lot better than I do, having been there a few more times. Now, it's always a big argument in our house of who holds the TV remote. And I always say, where's the controller? And she always says,
I'm over here.
So I guess I better give you the controller.
That wasn't me. Phil and I... this is going to be a problem, isn't it? I might have to take this off in a minute. Phil and I got involved with Sierra Leone. We lived in Kenya in the 90s, and we've been going out to Kenya every 18 months ever since. And I was at a promotion day for Kenya, and we were showing a video, and there was a really lovely brother who I'd never met before. He was in Birmingham, but I'd never met him. And he was showing a video about Sierra Leone. And I said, wow, that looks like a fantastic place to go. And he said, I've got a trip going in April, but I haven't got anyone to go with me. So I did a quick calculation. Yeah, okay. And I said, my daughter and I could come. Thought nothing more of it. A few months down the line, phone call. And we ended up going. So I left my husband at home looking after the teenager, and Jenny and I went to Sierra Leone with 3 others. So since then we've sort of fallen in love. Now, the infrastructure of the country...
Sierra Leone or with Bob?
Oh, well, both. He said, was that Sierra Leone or did I fall in love with Bob? And I said, they're both really. Yeah, you just, sorry. Yeah. So, Jenny and I fell in love with Sierra Leone, and I came home and I said, you have got to come. The infrastructure of this country looks quite scary, and some of the photographs that we show you on the images, you're going to think, what? Who'd want to go there? But what you have to remember is that over all this, that covers absolutely everything is the people and the brothers and sisters out there, and they can show so much love that you forget where you are, you forget what you're walking in, you forget what you're smelling, because there's a brother right next to you who wants to talk about the truth. And how amazing is that? So after a couple of visits, somebody came along and said, oh, do you fancy getting involved with Meal a Day? I'd really like a hand show. Who's heard of Christadelphian Meal a Day Fund? That's great. And you've also got a brand of your own, which is Christadelphian Meal a Day America. That's right, isn't it? So, Meal a Day got involved before I did, so this is what they did. During the war, schooling sort of collapsed, and there was a lovely primary school all set up, and the headmaster had run away with all the money. So Bob Fox, who's the brother that I went with first time to Sierra Leone, he's the link man for CBM. He identified this school, went back to Meal a Day and said, we need some help, we need to get this school going. So Meal a Day now funds that school. So they now fund two schools. The country, as I said, broke down, there was no education, and when in 2001, when they lost and they all ran away and the country was left in a puddle, really, the government in its wisdom said, right, okay, we'll educate boys then. So 5 years down the line, they'd educated a load of boys, but there's 10 years of war, there's 5 years when boys are educated, so that's 15 years in which women were not educated. So if you want to teach somebody the truth, they need to be able to read, right? So Meal a Day have set up 8 literacy classes. Also, there was a lot of orphans during the time, and they started a few years ago, so it was about 6 months before I first went in 2012, and they started a very small street kids project that we'll talk about a bit later on. They also do a leprosy feeding where the brothers and sisters from Freetown Ecclesia take food once a month, because over there's no health care, and if you're a leper, sadly, bye-bye. You know, you're not considered that, you know, you need to get food or health care. They also fund agricultural projects which help people to feed themselves. There's a lot of chicken farms and a few pineapple farms as well. And then they fund one-off clinics. Right, the controller goes, right, okay. We're going to talk a little bit about a very difficult place on the edge of Freetown City. Freetown City is, I think you saw some pictures earlier, it's very crammed together. But if you've got nothing, say you were orphaned during the war or you were a street child, there's a lot of street children out there. There's a bit of a culture of street children, because of course when you grow up on the street you become a teenager and you start looking after the little kids. So there's that sort of structure going on around. So there's no, well, there is earning power, but you can imagine where it comes from. So these people have nowhere to live, and there was a rubbish tip on the edge of the city where the rubbish was just put, and so people started pushing it down and stamping on it and driving vehicles on it and building houses. And then more rubbish came, so more houses were built, more rubbish came and more houses were built, and then, well, the houses are quite established on the edge, but they're building on a rubbish tip, right? So there's no water, there's very little health care. Here's some stats for you. So it's an informal settlement. Now, on Crew Bay, there's 20,000 people living there. There's one clinic, and it's really not very great. It's below sea level, so it's on the side of a river, and the people in Freetown really don't like Crew Bay, so they chuck their rubbish in there. So they chuck their rubbish in the river, the rubbish runs down into Crew Bay, and all the people in Crew Bay just get the city's rubbish next door to them. And in 2008, the WHO, I think, or Save the Children, said it was the worst place in the world to be born, and there are a lot of babies born out there. We had some stats about infant mortality, and it was really, really bad. You walk down the street and all the places are really, really crammed together. People are cooking on the side of the road. You can probably see the bridge up there. Save the Children, in their wisdom, decided that they were going to give Crubea Bridge. I don't want to knock Save the Children, but they decided they were going to give Crubea Bridge, but unfortunately they didn't go to the chief first to talk about it. So they built the bridge and it sank. And we've spoken to the chief, and the chief said if they'd have told me, I'd have done it properly. So what do you do in Crubea? Oh no, hang on. All right, okay. So what do you do to help these people? This is a city, well, it's a city in itself, isn't it? 20,000 people, a town of 20,000 people that don't have any water. And children are dying. So Bob Fox and the chairman of Mila Day and another brother called Mike Green walk into Crubea, and it's actually quite safe. Once you get the agreement from the chief, you have to go into the chief's tent. Yes, there is a chief of Crubea. And once you get an agreement from the chief and you wander in, they stood on the beach, and these three very burly men wept. And they turned to the chief and they said, "What can we do? What do we do?" So the chief said, "Well, we need water." Bob and the other two sort of went, "Well, okay, how do we do that then?" They said, "Well, there's a main just up the road, but we don't know how to do it." And they went, "Okay then, how many taps do you need?" They said, "Oh, 10? Okay, all right, 10 taps." So Mila Day funded these 10 taps. Now there's one of them on your picture there. So they funded these 10 taps to go into the area, and they were basically, they took pipes off the mains, which was apparently legal. I don't know, I'm not going to ask. So they took pipes off the mains, they got the locals to dig it, they got the locals to do it. There's a lovely brother at Freetown Ecclesia that was help them do the structure, gave them the money, and they got these 10 taps in Crubea. Fantastic. What they do is they leave them locked 22 hours of the day. They unlock them for 2 hours. The reason being is because the children were so excited to see the water that they were playing in it, which is obviously not a great idea if that's your only water supply. So you get cholera in cities like this, sadly, and every time there's been cholera in Freetown City, Crubea has come off worse. They've lost more and more children. In 2014, so that's 2 years since my first visit, we went and we sat in their council building and we said, "Have the taps made any difference whatsoever?" And they said, "Well," they said, "put it this way. We had cholera a few months ago in the city. People were dying in the city. No one died in Crubea. No one died of cholera in Crubea." So Mila Day have been able to get in there under the radar, not involving politicians who don't want Crubea to exist. They've been able to get in there and put those taps and put water in there. And then people come round and they say, "Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this?" Wow, gives us an opportunity to start preaching the truth, doesn't it? So, yeah, the children play in the water, as you can see, so we can't stop that. Right, okay, we'll come off Crubea a little while. So during the war, I don't want to dwell on this because I think there are some children in the room. Oh no, there aren't. Are there any smaller children in the room? There's a smallish child that might, yeah, okay, thank you. So during the war, there were some nasty atrocities that went on, and people had limbs amputated violently. That's all I'm going to say. So what happened was these poor people were living in the city in Freetown, and over the years after the war, the government got quite embarrassed about this because they were begging, because, hey, you can't work if you've not got a leg or you've not got an arm. So they made these amputee camps, but unfortunately the amputee camps were in the middle of nowhere. And yeah, they were absolutely in the middle of nowhere, and there's 2-kilometre walk, remember, amputees, to get some water. So there's a picture behind me of the taps that Meal a Day put in for them. It was the same sort of thing. It was a pipe from the mains, 2 kilometres down the road, and they've got 2 tap system there. And again, the people said, why are you doing this? We've got an ecclesia in that amputee camp now, and a really strong ecclesia at that. And when we go there, they want to learn, they want to listen. They're amazing, and they're fantastic football players. If you have ever been able to see amputee football, you've got to see it. The crutches and the one leg, my life, they whopped us. We've only got 2 legs. They were amazing. So that's an image of the inside of their hall that they're using, and of the brothers laying the pipes, and it's now Phil's turn.
So I had perhaps the most amazing conversation of my life with these 2 young brethren. You'll recall, I won't go into detail, but you'll recall the bag that Stephen had last night with the 10 numbers in. And if you can imagine a warlord who would come into your village, who held out a black beret, and in it the 3 bits of paper. And it said, one of them said arm, one of them said leg, and one of them said head. And you had to choose, or you had to fight. And that was the choice that was put before a large number of young boys and men in Sierra Leone. And these 2 said to me, just as we were sitting in the shade of a tree at the primary school, they said, have you ever seen war? I said, no fighting? No, I saw a few riots in London on the TV last year, but no. Have you ever seen an AK-47? No, I haven't seen an AK-47. And it was quite harrowing when the warlords came into their village that they just knew to run. Families were keyed up to run, not go back to your homes. You just ran into the bush. And that's what these 2 did. Run as deep into the bush as you could. Yes, if you dared stop and look through the banana leaves to see what atrocities were happening in your village, fine, but get as far away as quickly as you can. And these 2 young men would live in the bush for 3 years off bushmeat, making their way back into the village when the warlords had gone to collect what they could before going back out into the bush to make camp. And you just wonder what the truth means to them, that they now have life and the hope of life eternal. It means far much more to them than it could ever mean to me. And one of the most wonderful things about going overseas to see your brothers and sisters is that you always come back better than when you've gone. Not that they learn from you, you learn from them, from their witness of faith, from the things that they endure. They are quite a remarkable people. Kids and school, this is your priority, your area of expertise.
So the school that I spoke about a little bit earlier, where the headmaster ran away, so this is the school, and it was empty when Meal a Day took it over, and there was no children, and there's actually a really nice little village right next door. They don't have much. They've got a pump that Meal a Day have put in for them, and grass huts, and it's very, very basic. Their clothes are always so clean though. I can never work it out. You walk through the town and there's washing and there's baby grows and they're all white. I can't do that. So this is the children, and when you turn up, they sing to you and they shout and they grab hold of you Meal a day gives them their uniforms, it gives them a meal a day, and it gives them free education, and it has a stipulation that it educates as many girls as it does boys. So it's absolutely brilliant. It's run well. A lot of the teachers are our brothers and sisters now. Same reason. Why are you doing this? You got a door open then, haven't you? And well, you can see the faces. There are proper Western toilets there. I'm not quite sure who knows how to use them, but they are there. And the teachers are fantastic. The guy in white there, he's actually not a brother, he's the deputy head, but he's always very, very happy when we get there. And they are being taught well. In fact, they're being taught so well that when they get to secondary school, they're coming back to the primary school and saying, can we come here? Because we learned so much more here than we do there. Which is really sad, isn't it? Because it means that the infrastructure of the country hasn't caught up yet. So that's quite sad. So this is an example of the sort of accommodation that people live in. Right next door to the school, because there was no healthcare centre in the area, Meal a Day has built a clinic. At this point in time, when this photograph was taken, we had made an agreement with the government, but unfortunately they still hadn't supplied the staff. We said, we'll build the unit, you provide the staff. They hadn't at this point, they have now. So there are staff there, and I think it's being used even more now since the Ebola crisis, but we don't know because we haven't been able to go out for 18 months. So it's a really nice unit. As you can see, it's really tidy, and just behind are two nurses' accommodations for people. You are literally in the middle of nowhere here. We've driven from Freetown. It takes about 8 hours with a stop drive out into the country to a place called Kenema. If you've been following the Ebola crisis, you will know that that was the centre at one point of the problem. You drive out of Kenema, sort of, 45 minutes along a dust track, and then you turn sort of right. You're in the middle of nowhere. So here's another example of some of the roads. I mean, they're brilliant. The roads, when they've built roads, are great. Unfortunately, there aren't that many of them. And the very, very traditional houses with the grass huts. This is Sister Rosie Short. I'm not sure whether anyone's met her. She was a nurse when she came out with us in 2014. It inspired her so much that when she came back, she's a qualified nurse, she's an A&E nurse. When she came back to the UK, she has done the extra qualification, which is really tough, to mean that she's now a tropical nurse. She can take blood and diagnose malaria, etc., etc., etc. So the trip inspired her so much. So that's absolutely brilliant. So Meal a Day do things well, and not everybody else does. I think you might be able to spot there's a problem in the left-hand side image. Their toilets are, well, we call them long drops. I'm not quite sure what you call them. You've maybe never seen them, but they're sort of, well, a hole in the ground, really, with a big, well, they're very, very deep, with a big sort of concrete platform put on top and a building put on top of that, and it's literally a hole in the ground. But if you don't do it properly, if you put it on the wrong place, well, you see what happens on the left-hand side. So Meal a Day like to do things properly. So that's one of our toilets, long drops, that we've provided for the community, and that will service the town. It saves people going in the river, for obvious reasons I'm sure you understand. We also provide, in this particular town, and wherever we can, water projects are really important to us, and we would provide very good pumps. We don't use the mechanical ones because they break. Keep it simple as you possibly can. An arm pump, everyone can do it. Okay, we're going back to Freetown now, so we're driving back sort of 9 hours to the city. The roads are really good, actually, flat. Unfortunately, at the end of the war, there were a lot of children who were orphaned, and a lot of other charities have got involved with this. There's a charity called Don Bosco, which is a Catholic charity, and there's a few others around the place, but there's been a lot of children just sleeping on the streets. And you drive around Freetown at night, and there are children just underneath the covers of the building, and the shutters are up and the children are asleep. Now there's a sort of a culture, as I explained before, where small children who sort of turn up on the streets have now grown up into sort of your teenagers, and they are hardened street children. They know their business. You never see girls on the street because the girls are housed round the back for obvious reasons. So what our brothers and sisters have done, and we employ a social worker who's not a brother actually, but we have to through government for our project. So we have a social worker and we have another sister, and what they do is they build relationships with these, they're called bras and sissies. It's brothers and sisters, these older children, and they build relationships with them. They go out, they feed them, and they say, when the little kids turn up, will you tell us? So you go out regularly, and you go into the city regularly at night, and it can be a bit edgy, but it's okay. So, and Sister Nancy is amazing, absolutely amazing, and she'll go out there. She's a very strong African woman, and she's amazing. So she's built the relationship with the older ones. As soon as the little ones come up, the older bras and sissies go, he's a new one, because they don't want to look after them. They don't want any new children on the streets, because it means they got to look after them, they got to feed them, etc., etc. With girls, sadly, they have a use, so it's a little bit more difficult to get the girls from them, but slowly catch your tiger. So we look after our children well. The children on the right are two of our street children. The children on the left are two children that live in Crewe Bay. You can see the difference, can't you, just by looking at them. So what we do is we identify a new street child on the streets. You're not allowed to grab that child and say, you're coming with me, kiddie. You're not allowed to do that for obvious reasons, because, so what you have to do is you have to take their details. So the social worker takes the details and he says, I'll tell you what, I'll meet you so-and-so place, so-and-so time. If you want to come, it's up to you. So the child has got a choice at that point. Usually, the children come and meet us, and from that point, we then start to find out why this, and they can be really young, why this child, maybe a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, why are they on the streets? How did they get there? What's this all about? Now, sometimes that child's stolen something. Sometimes that child's been beaten so badly by his dad. Sometimes that child's an orphan. So what the social worker is then responsible for is to find out, build a relationship with the child, find out why they're there. Now, if the child's come from the country, they got on a bus, they came there, they went, oh no, I'm in the middle of nowhere, and I'd like to go home, but I've got no money, we will, as a charity, as Meal a Day, we will take them back home. We'll often take them back home anyway, because if we take them back to their village, we can find out what the problem was. So, if they've stolen something, we'll pay their debt. If, we'll take them back home again, we'll sort things out, we'll try and negotiate with the family, we'll try and get that child back with its family, but sometimes that doesn't work, and sometimes we can't do that. So what we'll do is we'll find a relative that child has. So maybe they're an orphan. Now, an orphan in Sierra Leone is a little bit different to an orphan that we understand. They might have one parent living, but that parent cannot sustain them. So what we do is we pay for that child to be fed. We pay for that child to get back to school. We give them enough money to have a uniform, and we basically go back to mum and dad, mum usually, or granny or granddad, and say, look, if you can give this child a bed to sleep, we will make sure they go to school, And what we'll also do is they can come to our ecclesial hall every day straight after school, and we'll give them an hour's extra lessons because they've missed all that schooling because they've been picking up metal on a rubbish tip to get enough money to have a bowl of rice every day. So we'll take all those problems from you, and basically we will get that child back to where they need to be in their schooling year. And we'll also give them a meal. And we'll also give them a bit of time to play. And actually they can come on a Sunday and a Saturday and they can join in our Sunday school, and we'll give them a little outfit so they've all got the same clothes on. So actually what we're doing is we're not adopting these children, but we're facilitating a relationship that's building back with their families again, so that we can preach the truth. Because do you know what? You can't play unless you can be first. And you have to, in order to be, you have to have all these problems taken away, and then you can play. Some of the children in 2012, when I met them, they had only been in our project for about 9 months, and I don't like to use the word, but they were quite feral. There was no boundaries. They were quite, they didn't really know how to play. They didn't really know how to build a relationship with you. And obviously we were white-faced people, and they hadn't probably ever touched a white person's hand before, let alone played with their hair and whatever. So in 2012, that's what they were like. 2013, they were a lot better. 2014, these children were children again. It was such a relief. Some of them, when they were taken off the streets, were about 8. A lot of them were about 8 or 9. And what we do, we feed them, we give them lessons, and we play with them. And what we're doing is, because sadly a lot of the adults around didn't have the education that they should have had, what we're doing is, when we're there, is we're doing activities with the children, and while we're doing the activities with the children, the adults are there witnessing what we're doing. So it's a sort of, well, it's a learning curve, isn't it? It's helping people. A lot of these adults never played because they were hiding. And it's a really, really sad thing. I'm just going to tell you 3 tiny case studies. How are we for time? 6 minutes left. I've talked too much. Sorry, everybody. Really, really quickly, case study. Mama. He was literally working the dumps. He's on your left, the other side. He was working on the dumps, and he was picking up metal. And he was literally approached by our social worker. And he, when I first met him, didn't really know how to smile, was hypervigilant, was sort of watching, and he didn't really know how to build relationships. When I saw him last time, he certainly knew how to build relationships. The little girl in the middle, Zainab, has had a really hard life. She's had parents that haven't been very kind to her, and grandparents that haven't been very kind to her, and we've had to put in place safeguarding, our safeguarding policy for her to look after her. But actually she's now doing really well. She's back in the school, and we hope that she'll develop into a great young woman, and she's lovely. She's absolutely lovely. And then the little boy on the other side, Jonathan, he has a learning disability, and of course he's not going to be on the top rung of a parent's investment, because are they going to get much back? But actually he is adorable, and he's in our project, and yes, he can cuddle. He can definitely cuddle. Sorry, I've talked too much.
I hope you're getting the impression of the way that preaching is happening in Sierra Leone. It's a touch to preach methodology. They're not projects that we're coming up with, they're projects that our brothers and sisters like Sister Nancy are saying, I want to do something about these kids, and enabling them to go and do that. They are finding a way to build relationships and to preach with the local community so that they learn about Christadelphians. And we were very well blessed recently to take a whole group of 24 of us last April on a prepared to preach, a P2P trip over to Sierra Leone with lots of kit that we shipped over there. all wearing luminous green t-shirts to scare the life out of everybody that we came across. And we had an objective of teaching of, there's my son, our son in the foreground there, I think doing a Noah's Ark presentation to the kids, teaching Sunday schools, painting the walls of the classrooms for the schools, for the street kids to bring to life the Bible subjects which the teachers could then teach from. And some of the youngsters were also, we took over all these scaffolding poles to make a climbing frame for the street kids to play on. We even found time for a game of football. This is proper football, not American football, with the Kenema Youth Circle dressed in their blue strip, and I'm pleased to say that we actually managed to win that game playing on an old dusty piece of ground. That's our daughter, by the way, on the right hand side carrying the baby. So Sierra Leone, it's a place that we need to remember in our prayers. It's a place where the truth is alive, where people are preaching there. They are going up and leaving home and going to live in a village. They can preach for a year, and we're renting a house for them to go and stay in, and we'll come back a year later and we'll see how they're getting on and interview for baptism anybody that they think is ready. And God willing, with God's blessing, we'll continue to see a growth in the understanding of the truth in the people of Sierra Leone.